Hi there, my name is Andy Farquharson and I'm your host on Alternative Exit,
the podcast dedicated to educating small business owners about the possibilities, benefits and challenges of transitioning to an employee ownership model. Did you know that there are over 200 million SMEs around the globe with an owner that will be retiring within the next 10 years? Many of these owners will never actually find a buyer for their business, forcing them to close their doors, wreaking havoc on their employees and the communities. There is an alternative. This show will explore different forms of employee ownership and the best practices for a successful transition. Each episode is going to feature interviews with experts on employee ownership, business owners who've successfully made the transition, and consultants who've helped facilitate these changes.
Okay, now let's get on with the show.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Alternative Exit. Today's guest is Colin Wade. Now Colin is the Managing Director of Chemco International, which is a specialist coatings manufacturer serving the marine, offshore and petrochemicals industry based out of Scotland. Now Colin's story is a little bit different than other people we've had on the pod. He joined Chemco specifically to lead its transition towards 100% employee ownership. So he's been steering the ship ever since, and in 2020 he was actually recognised as an International Director of the Year by the Institute of Directors in Scotland. So look, today what we're going to be doing is exploring how a manufacturing business makes employee ownership work and what it really takes to build an ownership culture, as well as sort of transitioning from traditionally owned business, leadership in a traditional business into leadership in an employee-owned business. So Colin, welcome to the Alternative Exit.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Andy, for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Back when you joined Chemco, I mean, what was that conversation like when they were sort of bringing you in and you knew it was going to be 100% employee-owned business?
Well, there was two aspects. One was very common to EO, which I didn't realise at the time. And that was that there was no succession plan here at Chemco International.
Okay.
We had an founding owner, who was still running the company after over 30 years, who had decided, perhaps a little bit earlier than he originally intended, that he wanted out. But it being a little bit earlier, he didn't have people in place to take the business forward. And he had several attempts at bringing in someone that could become a managing director and reporting to him whilst he was still in the business. But he described that as being half in, half out, whether he would have probably still felt a need to control and to direct. And what he latterly realised is that in effect that would become a case of two managing directors, which generally speaking doesn't work. And he recognised that. What's really unusual in my case though, far less common than what I've just described, is that I was actively seeking an employee ownership business, or at least one that was looking to go into employee ownership. And I thought...
You're right, Colin. That is very, very different than what we see from sort of leaders with your experience going into...
I'd come out of a more corporate, a much larger business at 50, and I decided I wanted to do something different for the next 10, 15 years. I was this corporate role.
Okay, so, but I mean, something different. There could be a whole number of things that you could go to.
Yeah.
You could go sort of working directly in non-profit, like you could go, you could just have a totally different career change. What excited you about employee ownership?
What excited me was way back in 2008, I'd been given a book by David Erdal, an expert in EO, who had led the management consultation for Loch Fyne Oysters going into employee ownership. And he wrote an excellent book. His son gave me a signed copy of. And I spent the next 8 or 9 years fantasizing actually about how fantastic EO was based on the book without having a clue whether that was actually the reality. So when I decided to go for a late career change and do something different, I was inspired by that book and by that journey that Loch Fyne Oysters had taken. Because there was a business where the owners had gone into EO for all of the right reasons and none of the wrong reasons. Mm-hmm. And every time I've since come across employee-owned businesses where the founders put the business into employee ownership for all of the right reasons because they wanted to have a sustained legacy, effectively, and not trying to ditch a business that might be in financial distress, then it seems to have worked out very, very well indeed in every case, as it has at Chemco.
Yeah, fantastic. So at the start of that story, you talked a little bit about succession and the need to have that sort of structured approach to this sort of succession journey. I mean, you talked about he'd had a couple of attempts. The prior owner had a couple of attempts at driving succession. Was that, it sounded as though there was potentially two different challenges there. I mean, one that he probably wasn't ready to let go, reading between the lines. And then the other one was there the right structural environment for that new MD to be able to come in and take control? If you can just talk through that.
Well, that's a very pertinent point there. The reality is that the company at that time, the founder at that time, would freely admit, if he was available today, would freely admit that he was looking for a younger version of himself.
Yep.
A person with decades of experience and technical knowledge in a very specialized sector who could go on to technically develop the company further. Something he'd done very successfully. But of course, what the business really needed was not a younger version of himself with the same amount of experience, which is impossible to find, a needle in a haystack, but somebody that would come in with a different set of skills that would take a business that was 30, 35 years old and identify not the strengths of it to cherish and nurture, but actually the weaknesses to sort out, the weaknesses that had perhaps never been addressed.
Yeah.
And my finding both here and in previous businesses has been that's common to many industrial, many manufacturing businesses.
Well, I don't think we need to limit it.
The entrepreneurs focus on their strengths.
Yeah, especially like people have been doing it for their whole lives. They've dedicated their life to this, and especially they've run a business a certain way for such a long period of time, and can only envisage it being run this way. And to do it exactly that way, you need all my skill sets. But yeah, it leads them down the path of needing to find a unicorn. One part that I don't know, I'd love to get your thought of the mindset coming into this, because obviously you don't have that wealth of experience, in the industry. So, like, how did you think about making up, in the sort of the baseball parlance, like Moneyball parlance, is making up the score in the aggregate, right? Okay. Like, how did you sort of make up the whole of the previous owner with your experience and also the rest of the people in the team?
Okay. It was very, very simple, actually, very, very straightforward, because it was a relatively small business, a relatively simple business, other than its technology. And so I went right back to basics and started with a simple SWOT analysis of what the company did well and does well and what it does less well. And so I teased out of the team, and particularly the founder, all of the successes in the business, and they lay in one or two specific areas that have driven great success, but also teased out the challenges, the frustrations as to what perhaps was the treacle that's too stiff to stir. What were the difficult bits, the bits they didn't enjoy doing, because they tend to be the bits you're not so good at. And we came out with quite a long list in both quarters. And of course, I made it my job, or my duty actually, to cherish those things that the company was doing very well on, to cherish them and make sure that the people responsible for that felt secure and were secure and were supported. But I wasn't going to meddle in their areas because I've got nothing to bring to them other than continuity. My efforts were focused on the areas of weakness, irrespective of whether they were my comfort zone or not. And once we listed out the weaknesses and we all agreed on them, we then set about, well, who's going to tackle each weakness? And if we haven't got the best person for that job, then we're going to have to recruit for them. Mm-hmm. So the next 2 or 3 years was a case of recruiting in the kind of succession team a business would ideally want in order to plug those gaps. We've roughly trebled our turnover over the last 7.5 years based on that very, very good strategy. But all I would say to you, Andy, is I believe succession is absolutely key. And if a business doesn't have a succession plan ready before going into EO, in my opinion, it really shouldn't deter that business going into EO. It just means that part of the transition hasn't yet been dealt with. But the simple SWOT analysis should come before the recruitment.
Yeah. If we dive into that, it sounds like you went on quite a collaborative process, man. I love it when you talked about, like, you find the weaknesses that we all agree on. Yeah. Not many people lead like that. I mean, was that the culture that was within Chemco already?
There was a lot of frustration that the business hadn't s- succeeded far more than it actually had. The best
Okay.
products in the world, and the world should be forming a queue at our door for them. And there was a certain degree of, and it's very, very common, it's not a criticism, there's that almost blindness to the areas lacking in strength. And once that blindness has been exposed, it becomes quite a simple thing for everyone to agree on. Well, we're all very frustrated in that and that area, and this is what I think we need to do about it to take that frustration away. So it's been, I'll use a very simple term, it's been quite a happy journey for us.
Yeah.
For a lot of people there prior to EO, and people like myself and others that I've brought in, it's been quite a satisfying process of
Okay.
nurturing the existing culture, which was fantastic, but actually just opening up that ambition that was always there and making it a reality.
That's very cool. When I hear people sort of talk about employee ownership in lots of different sectors, I mean, they talk about the propensity of the people who work within those sectors to be able to adopt it, to start thinking and acting like owners. And manufacturing is one of those sectors where people go, like, this can be a challenge for some people. I mean, how was it accepted by the team? And then, like, how did you harness employee ownership to help them take advantage of their new ownership and take the business forward?
Okay, that's a big question. We had a settling in period, there's no doubt. It was a major change to the team, the existing team here, to a new broom, if you like. And whilst the founder and I got on famously well from day one, we just clicked. He knew he didn't need to get out of the business straight away, that we couldn't have to. He went into a trustee role, leaving me behind to make some kind of mark on the business. And so there was a real getting to know you stage. I have to be honest with you, Andy, I tread fairly carefully in those early steps. Past experience tells me that if you enter the room with a bang, then some people might join you on the journey, but you're going to leave a hell of a lot of people behind. Because if you've got long-serving people that have worked in a founder-owner culture, then there's going to be a lot of people that are not used to change. And so it was here. And so,
but Colin, like with that, like you came in with the transition to employee ownership. That's a massive bang for a lot of these people.
It is, and it was enough, wasn't it? It was enough in the initial stages. I think I've been on a few podcast webinar type of things, and I've listened to a number of others, and what comes out loud and clear is we all try really, really hard right at the beginning to get everybody on board. Well, you know what? It takes some time, and some people need longer than others. And part of my job was to try and understand folk here and see who was jumping on board because they were desperate for change and who would need a little bit more encouragement. And I have to say, the odd one who wasn't going to make that change. And that's where ultimately you have one or two difficult conversations.
Yeah.
Because this was a business that was absolutely ripe for change and for progress.
Yeah, look, I guess resistance to change is always it's one of those constants that's out there. But when you think back to, I'd love to see you to think about, so what are some of the pushbacks that you had from the employees back when you made that transition? I mean, because you also mentioned there it took a long time. I mean, talk about sort of what are some of the pushbacks and what are the timeframes we're talking about? Okay,
it took about 2 years to sort it all out from that point of view. To get the team in place that was the best of the old and the best of the new, and connecting and bonding in a way that would become, and has absolutely become, like a second family to most of us.
Yeah,
it's a very, very tight culture. It's certainly the tightest by far I've ever been brought up.
Okay, that's great.
And that's what they tell me, not the other way around. So it did take quite a while, and I have to be honest, Andy, some people through their own choice weren't up for that change. And we lost a few people in that first couple of years.
Was that because they thought the responsibility of employee ownership was too much, or?
I think that's the gist of it. I think what we found was, I was very keen, and the leadership team here that we formed was very keen that people would become self-empowered and that we would have less managers of people, because we've got employee owners now who should know their job and shouldn't need to be spoon-fed each day as to what their daily tasks are going to be. They should own their area. Now, everybody here at Chemco is 100% on board with that, and they manage themselves. They might need direction. Business will always need direction, and me included. But they don't need telling what to do from hour to hour, day to day. Is still the case in most companies, perhaps, certainly in manufacturing.
Yeah.
So some people actually are a wee bit institutionalized and need that reassurance of being told what to do each day, particularly on the factory floor. And it was those people that, by and large, moved away. Well,
I lost you there for a little bit, Colin. We captured a lot of what you're talking about, sort of about that, I guess, that need for people to more embrace that ownership, that ownership, and which sort of aligns with that self-management. I mean, what were some of the activities that you did within the business to bring people on that journey?
I'm sorry, Andy, I missed a part of that.
Okay, so I guess I was wondering what were some of the activities that you took as a business to bring people on that educational journey for that, to help them understand about what is ownership and also what does it mean for them and that as they sort of go down the path towards the self-management ownership.
Okay, well, throughout this journey, and it continues to this day, I've maintained a quarterly briefing to the employee owners, and that's where typically myself, but sometimes one or more of the three other directors of the business, present to not the workforce, not the employees, but we present to the shareholders. So we have what I call a shareholders meeting every quarter.
Love it.
Not an employee owners, a shareholders meeting. That is a way of keeping people informed. It's a way of keeping me and the rest of the board informed. But we are answerable to the employee owners, to our shareholders. And that's something takes a lot of people a lot of time, including MDs and other directors, a long time to realise how significant that change is. That a lot of employee-owned companies run perfectly well from what I've seen as being a conventional management structure, conventional employees. It just happens to be an employee ownership. And there's perhaps a bit more information shared. Now, to my mind, that's missing an opportunity, because the reality is you really, really get people on board if they truly own a slice of the action. And we've done that in two ways. One is that we've opted to have a slightly hybrid model whereby through a share incentive plan, we have gifted everybody in the business that's eligible and therefore after 12 months service, everyone's being gifted an equal share in the business.
Okay, so everyone just goes. You just do any of your service. Everyone gets has got the same amount of shares. It's just straight ownership of the business.
Yeah, so we've got teams on the factory floor and in back offices with the same number of shares as each of them.
Okay, and what proportion is that team ownership compared to the trust?
The trust will always have 51% majority share.
Yep.
Currently, that's running at just over 25%, but that includes some share options through an EMI scheme. Mm-hmm. Sorry, it excludes the EMI scheme.
Excludes, yeah.
And we've got a plan in place as a trust board to basically free issue, else through options on EMI, all of the available shares up to 49%, because why would we hang on to them?
Yeah, I love it.
If we're acting as a company board and as a trust board, solely in the best interest of the employee owners, why would the trust hang on to shares that it doesn't need to maintain a majority?
Okay.
Now that's a little less common than you see elsewhere, and people often have to buy their shares. But if it's genuinely employee owned, why wouldn't the trustees maintain a majority shareholding of 51% to ensure stability in the company? But why wouldn't the remaining shares be issued? And that's what we're in the process of doing. And the reason it's not complete yet is because there's a finite number of shares in value terms that can be issued tax-free each year. But that's what we've been doing.
Okay. Well, I think that answers my next question.
Well, if people have skin in the game, they are really brought in and they become true owners. And at that time, when you give an a shareholder briefing, you really are talking to your shareholders and you are answerable to them. So you have real balance. Real balance.
I love that. But you've also alluded to how that's been an unlock for you guys. I mean, can you point to any sort of concrete changes that has enabled Chemco to be better at competing or serving your customers that as a result of the transition to employee ownership?
Only insofar as if every person in the game has skin in the game, They are working for themselves and they are bettering themselves and their business for their end benefit. So their shares gain value proportionate to how much effort they're putting in. And how that manifests itself is you'll see people on the sales and marketing, the commercial side of the business, going the extra mile, knowing that not only are they sustaining their employment and building a better business, but they're actually increasing their share value each year. And ultimately, they will benefit directly from that at the same time as getting bonuses and dividends each year. So why wouldn't they?
Why wouldn't they?
Really brings a better focus to it. Not basically, it's the opposite of taking crumbs off the rich man's table whilst he goes home with a wheelbarrow full of cash, and it motivates like nothing else.
Yeah, Colin, I absolutely share that belief with you, but I think it sort of goes to that point that you mentioned a little bit earlier, that there were some cultural changes that you needed to make to bring that to reality. Sure. And some people didn't want to go on that journey.
Well, and it takes time, Andy. It takes time to take as many people as you can with you and leave as few behind as possible.
Yeah.
We could have been much more ruthless and go much faster, but that wouldn't have really been in the spirit of employee ownership.
Okay. And
from that point of view, I've reined my neck in from the way I've run previous businesses.
Yeah, okay. Well, and what has been, like, that's sort of one example that you talked about there of how you've had to change your leadership style in terms of having more patience to bring people on the journey. What else did you see as being really different in managing a traditional hierarchical organisation to an employee-owned business where everyone has more autonomy and
I don't think there is a great deal of difference. I think I'm not sure that every managing director of an employee-owned business would necessarily agree with me, but it's down to your style of leadership, and it's down to how much you truly believe in employee ownership. It's quite easy to run an employee-owned company like any other company. You give a bit more information out to the employee owners to convince yourself you're running an employee-owned business, but actually most of them aren't interested in the detail. Most of them are just what does it mean for me? Does it mean my job's safe? Does it mean I'm still going to get paid? Does it mean I might earn a bit more, benefit a bit more, have a bit more engagement with the business? But if you decide, well, actually, we are going to become the nearest thing technically you can be to being a collective, a cooperative, everyone cooperates with each other. And you know what? We'll run this on a semi-socialist type of model, but actually what we do in creating lots of shareholders is we create lots of mini capitalists at the same time. And without getting overly political, the way we've taken it as a hybrid model is we're getting the best of both worlds.
Well, what's in terms of the best of both worlds there? I mean, you talk about obviously sort of the capitalist and the socialist side, but I almost see like employee ownership as the purest form of capitalism. We're giving sort of more people that ownership that they can go and drive that, rather than some like localized collective ownership really sort of drives that to the outcomes, which is great. I mean, what do you see as the sort of the best parts that you've brought together? You talked about bringing the best of both worlds together. What do you see as the best of those both worlds? You've alluded to a couple of them.
Well, the best of both worlds is as simple as this business is focused on generating wealth, on generating added value, which is absolute a capitalist way of thinking. But the very socialist aspect of it is, it is for the sole and equal benefit of all that work here. And that's where the cooperative collectivism comes in, which is very much socialism. And I embrace it all. And the team here have learned and grown to embrace it all. So we're a happy ship, Andy, and I'd be happy if you're ever in the central belt of Scotland, come and see us and talk to anybody. Listen to anybody, and I think you'll get a very similar message.
Well, very cool. I might take you up on that.
You would be very welcome.
Next time I'm coming through Coatbridge, but we started this conversation talking a little bit about succession. And look, there's obviously 10 companies per week going into an EOT today in the UK. So it's growing in other parts of the world. What do you see are the core things that owners need to do to be ready to have the business be ready for a succession into an employee-owned structure?
Well, okay, what I would like to see change, and what I believe is needed, is that those employee owners, before they look internally or externally for succession, that they identify what the business actually needs going forward, as opposed to look for somebody that's going to do what they've done.
Okay.
So on the simplest level, I know there's a lot of help available out there, getting an independent view, an independent SWOT analysis done of what the strengths and weaknesses of the business are, what the frustrations and challenges are, and then, in my opinion, you recruit somebody that can plug those gaps. And then the company, all involved in the company, stand a chance of realising their ambition. And that's the bit I think is missing quite a lot of the time. I was very lucky, and the founder, he was very lucky, that he ultimately realised what he needed to do, that he couldn't find another younger version of himself that would be good enough. He needed to find someone very different. At the very same time, I was looking for a successful entrepreneur that wanted to get out and owned a sleeping giant. And that's what Chemco International was 8 years ago, a sleeping giant. So I knew that a few tweaks here and there could put it on steroids with the right team in place. So it's been a win-win from that point.
Okay, yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, it sounds like he needed the learning journey of having a couple of failed attempts to understand, to go through, to look for something different. Because like that path that you talked about there in terms of uncovering your weaknesses within your business takes a lot of humility. I mean, this is a lot of time, it's their baby. Like they've probably spent more time with their business than they have with their children. It takes a lot to do that.
I think it did. I've got huge respect for our founder and the journey that he took, both in taking the company to where he did, from zero, from nothing, but also that self-realization, exactly as you said, Andy, that self-realization to recognize something needed to change.
Yeah, it's always a key point, which is great. So, Colin, thank you so much for sharing with us today. Now, before we end, I like to ask all my guests 3 quick questions in a fast round. Are you up for that?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Okay,
so who is a leader that you most admire in employee ownership?
In all honesty, I don't know enough leaders in employee ownership to answer that one.
Okay.
I don't know.
All right, very cool. What's your favourite resource on employee ownership?
We're members of the Employee Ownership Association in the UK. We've also had a lot of support from Glenn Dott, the succession on the Employee Ownership desk at Scottish Enterprise.
Yep.
He's been a huge help. That's about it. We've created our own informal channels. I've networked personally, one or two of my colleagues have networked personally with quite a few other employee-owned companies. And we've shared some best practice informally with each other. And that's a useful thing to do. No standouts other than that.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Glenn's a standout. He's been a prior guest on the pod, and he's also, he was one of the key resources for me in learning about employee ownership with the podcast that he was doing on behalf of Scottish Enterprise a little while ago. So I'll put some links to those in the show notes. And then lastly, one last question is, what would you say to a business owner who's sitting on the fence about a transition to employee ownership?
Why are you sitting on the fence? You've got everything to gain from this, both personally and in terms of your legacy, and in terms of doing the right thing by your employee owners. And what's the real alternative?
Yep.
And it's
Love it, Colin.
Question of focusing on succession planning. That's the key.
Thank you so much for those responses. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for sharing your time. As I mentioned at the top of the pod, you've got a different story coming in from that leadership perspective, but having that focus on deliberate succession, taking your time, having more patience in that cultural transition. I mean, these are such amazing lessons that I think people can take from this. And thank you very much. Where can people go if they want to reach out and engage with and connect with either you or Chemco?
They're very welcome to reach out to Chemco via our website or with me directly. I'm happy for you to share my email address if you wish, Andy. We're happy to help. We'd like the story to spread. We'd like people to learn from our successes and challenges along the way.
Very cool. Well, Colin, thanks again for your time, and thank you for joining us on The Alternative Exit.
Thank you so much, Andy. You're welcome.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to continue learning about employee ownership as an alternative exit, head across to abettermonday.me for additional links and resources. You can also make sure to subscribe or follow along in your favorite podcast app, and be sure to leave us a 5-star review.